Hello everyone and welcome to another really wild game. It's from the final round of the FTX Crypto Cup and it's Magnus Carlsen versus Teymur Rajabov, and by going into this game, Magnus is already down a full point behind Teymur and he really needs a win to qualify for the actual event, as these are the preliminaries. And Rajabov with 8.5 points has, I think it doesn't really matter if he... whatever he does, he will be qualified for the main event. Magnus needs to win. There are chances for him to qualify if the game is a draw, but if he loses this game to Rajabov, then he's definitely not qualifying. So a lot is on the line. Let's see what happened here, as it is a pretty funny game. So here Magnus with the white pieces opens with e4. Rajabov goes for c5. He goes for the Sicilian defense, knight f3, knight to c6, and now Magnus doesn't bust open the center with the d4. But rather plays knight to c3, the close traditional Sicilian line, well, by doing this he avoids most of the well-known lines. So here we have e5 and now bishop to c4. So just continuing development, bishop to e7 and now d3. We have knight to f6 and both players just castle. So castles, and now knight to d5. So white will always enjoy that initial little bit of advantage, but he still needs to prove that this is something that he can play to create some sort of an edge, or maybe play for an advantage. So here we have d6 and c3 now. Now you want to play maybe a4, b4, in the future push some pawns. You will also have support for d4, and also you are just nicely controlling this knight on c6. So here we have rook to b8, black also ready to start pushing those pawns, and the Magnus stops it, of course, with a4. And here there are a few games where a6 was played, but here Rajabov just captures on d5, and it is now, as of move 9, that we have a completely new game. So let's see how Magnus deals with this. He plays bishop captures on d5, and now bishop to f6. We have rook to e1, and now rook to e8. We have bishop to d2, slowly playing this, as you can see. Not any sharp ideas in the position. We have knight to e7 attacking the bishop, and just bishop pulls back to c4. We have knight to g6 now with ideas of bringing the knight to the f4 square in the future, and only now Magnus expands here with b4. And here we have b6, just nicely keeping it solid, and here b5. Magnus closing the position on the queen side. Later on he's going to move the bishop. He's going to cement this further with c4, and at some point he's probably going to play a5, bust open the position, and maybe do a nice rook lift. So that's kind of the long-term plan. So here we have bishop to e6, offering to trade this bishop that was doing nothing for Magnus's very active light square bishop. We have bishop captures, and we have rook captures. You could also make a claim that maybe f captures is also fine. It will give you additional support to push this in the future, but Rajabov wants to, well, minimize his losing chances. And since he's pretty much, not pretty much, since he's sure that he's going to qualify, I don't know if he was following that or if he knows that it doesn't really matter what happens, that he's still going to qualify. Maybe he just decided to, still keep it a little bit safe at least. So here rook captures on e6, and now c4. And now Magnus put all of his pawns on light squares, which of course makes sense. He has a dark square bishop, so the bishop can go in between. The d5 square is available to the knight, so at some point this knight might be remaneuvered to the d5 square. And like we said, at some point you will play a5. There's additional support for that, and then maybe do a nice rook lift. So here knight to f4. Now putting some pressure on Carlsen's king side. You never really want to capture this knight, because then you just leave black with a really strong dark square bishop, and Rajabov is very well versed in playing positions like these. So here queen to b3 by Magnus. The d3 pawn was under attack, so he defends it, and now g5. Rajabov, not a stranger to moves like this, as he's a King's Indian player, so he's very well used to pushing those kingside pawns. So this is now coming, and Magnus needs to be ready for that. We have bishop to e3, g4 is coming, so he makes a square for the knight on d2, so g4, knight to d2, and now Rajabov continues pushing. We have h5. Knight to f1 now. Now the bishop can again move, and then the knight can come to e3 and then to f5, or even if possible to g3 and then to f5. Of course, Rajabov prevents this. He pushes h4. And now queen to d1, going after this g4 pawn, saying that, okay, if you push this, then I'm just going to capture this square is sufficiently defended. But Teymur really plays a beautiful move here. He plays bishop to g7. Now saying that if you capture my pawn, I have rook g6, and now you are losing the game. If the queen moves, I'm just going to capture here, and now I'm threatening your rook. I'm threatening a lot of very nasty discoveries here. Doesn't really matter what you play here. It's game over. So instead, after bishop to g7, Magnus brings the bishop back. We have bishop to c1. Again, he frees up the e3 square for his knight. The knight now wants to come to f5, and now comes rook to g6. Interestingly, Magnus could have also maybe captured on f4, but this is also very dangerous because now the bishop opens up an attack towards the rook, and now you have 3 pawns here that you have to worry about. And you could maybe capture this one and allow this captures and captures because, okay, for the moment you cannot capture this, but ideas like h3 are possible then. And now you either, well, there's not much you can do here. If you capture with the queen, then we can capture the rook on a1, and if you don't, well, then a lot of damage will happen to the king side. Rook to g6 is coming, and it's well, a very tricky line. So instead, after this bishop to g7, Magnus just plays the bishop to c1, and now comes rook to g6. And here, Rajabov could have maybe played h3 first. Maybe it does make sense. Now, if g3, knight can come to g2, and it's a pretty good position for black. However, Rajabov went after this bishop to c1 for rook to g6 right away, and now he allows knight to e3. And now the same thing doesn't really apply, because if h3, g3, the knight also covers this square, so that's not happening. So instead, after this knight to e3, we have queen to d7, and now comes knight to f5. Now just blocking the queen from entering the game, but also it's just a monster knight, now much like black's knight on f4. So here we have bishop to f6, now defending this pawn here, and Magnus says, all right, now nothing is really happening here on the king side, don't have to worry about that, I'm just gonna play a5 and now create that breakthrough on the queen side that I prepared some 20 moves ago. So here, king to h7. Now you might have some ideas of maybe even shifting the rook into the attack, bringing the king back to g7. But also it's just a safer square for the king. And also you might have ideas of rook to g8. Maybe then the g file opens up. So here, Magnus captures. We have captures. And now he doesn't go for the immediate rook lift with rook to a6, but rather first plays bishop to e3. And now Rajabov went into sort of a deep think. The situation on the clock is pretty similar. I think Magnus had some 5 minutes. Rajabov had 4 minutes on the clock. But here he played the incredible d5. And it's such a wild move that Magnus needs to play something. And the problem is it's not that easy because the time on the clock is ticking. And, well, g3 is a move that you can play, and it seems like a move you want to play, but it's super complicated and you will not waste time in a game to calculate this. For example, captures, knight h3 check, king g2, now d for example, pawn d captures on e4, captures, we're going to trade queens, and then after this happens, it's hard to evaluate what's really happening here, but Magnus does have some very clear ideas of what he's going to do with the rooks, so maybe this wouldn't really work out for him all that great. So after this d5 move, g3 goes a long way for white. Magnus, on the other hand, decided to play bishop captures on f4 right away. And now comes e captures on f4 and c captures on d5. So he grabs this, creates a passed d pawn, but this comes with a price of the rook on a1. But Magnus says this bishop is doing so much more than my rook, so why not just trade it? So bishop captures, we have queen captures. And now Rajabov plays rook to e8. Even though maybe h3 here could be played, this pawn is under attack, but Rajabov decides to give it up. He plays rook to e8, and Magnus grabs the pawn now, attacking the rook. He plays rook to g5, and now comes g3. So what do you play here? We have f3 by Rajabov, and now Magnus plays a very sneaky move. He plays h3, which seems like a crazy idea because this is attacked twice. But this is a very well-known setup because after black captures, you can play king to h2, and now you're going to use black's pawns as your shield because black cannot go through his own pawns, and you are so safe here. You don't really care what black plays for the rest of the game. You can just play anything and win this. So of course Rajabov not interested in giving this to Magnus. He plays rook to h5, and now Magnus has some 3 minutes on the clock. Teymur has 2 minutes on the clock, and it's already well, a very nice position. So here Magnus goes knight to f5. You could play something like queen to f6 also. It's a very active move and really ties down this queen to defense of the f7 pawn. But then you have to calculate what happens if rook captures on d5, as the rook on e1 is undefended. And while this is good for white, you don't want to spend all your time wondering if it's really good for white. So instead, after rook h5, like we said, knight to f5 was played, and now rook captures on f5. Other than this, you really don't have all that many moves. Queen to g7 checkmate is the threat, and it's just a much better position for white if Teymur doesn't give back the exchange. So here he gives it up, rook captures, e captures, he trades the rooks as well, and now queen captures on d5. And now we enter the queen's endgame, where Magnus is up a pawn, but as you know, in queen against queen endgame, that's usually not enough to win the game. So let's see if Magnus was able to do it, because he really needs to win this to qualify for the main event. So here, there are some ideas here. You could like capture this pawn, makes sense because you defended this pawn, but then you allow queen captures on d3, and now black's c pawn is also incredibly fast. So here Magnus plays queen to e7 first. He says, all right, if you move the queen now, then grabbing this pawn will be very good for me. So Teymur grabs the f5 pawn first, and now h captures on g4. So what do you play here? You cannot really capture here because then queen captures on f7. So queen to d5, Rajabov keeps the queen centralized, so everything is nicely defended here. This is still attacked, and Magnus needs to find a reasonable plan. So here he starts with queen to f6. Now ideas like g5, queen to h6 are also possible. Maybe something can happen with that. And here it was very interesting because Rajabov's time almost ran out. He came to 1 second on the clock when he played this king to g8 move, and I mean that's just very interesting because these are rapid games, but you do get a few seconds increment after you make each move. So here queen to f5. Now Magnus offers a queen trade. Of course the king and pawn endgame will be winning for him because he's up a pawn, but now queen to b3. Again, Rajabov makes this move with less than a second on the clock. Again, he gains some increment, and now queen captures on f3. We have queen captures on b5, and now Magnus is still up a pawn, but it's Rajabov who has the passed pawn, and if he can somehow consolidate, start pushing those pawns, it's going to be, well, Magnus might not even be able to draw this game. So here Magnus centralizes the queen. When in doubt, always centralize your queen. That's how chess works. And here, what you probably want to do is move your queen with tempo, and queen b1 check does exactly that. Rajabov did not play this, but point is you want to start moving your passed pawn as quickly as possible. Even at the price of this pawn, you really don't care. You're going to capture this pawn, still defend this pawn, and now this is, well, you cannot lose this. So instead, after queen to d5, Rajabov goes back. He plays queen to e8. Now he wants to push this, and he's saying, okay, my queen will at least be a little bit safer here. But now there's one very special move that Magnus finds that sort of allows him to go for the initiative. So feel free to pause the video here and try to find this move while I give you a couple of seconds. So for those of you who were able to do it, congratulations on spotting that the queen and king are on the same diagonal. And if this pawn was here, that'd be very good for white. So here Magnus starts by pushing g5. And I imagine all of you decided to do this as well. And this is the only move where Magnus can claim some advantage. And here you want to play king to g7 and just say, okay, this is really nothing. The game continues, and maybe you can consolidate the king, maybe start pushing those pawns, but still, it's not going to be easy. However, here Teymur played queen to e6. He offered a queen trade, and it's like okay, he was down to a few seconds on the clock, but it's very, very interesting because this is now completely losing for him. Even though he has the outside pass pawn, or sort of outside pass pawn, it's not exactly the rim pawn, but this does not work. And Magnus quickly grabs it with f captures on e6 and now f4. And now can you do something here with black because of this passed b pawn? Let's find out. King to f7, we have king to f2, b5 now, now controlling all of these squares, which is very, very nice. King to e3, and now king to g6. We have g4 by Magnus, again not allowing any squares for Rajabov's king, and now b4. We have king to d2, the king now has to stop the pawns, and now e5. Of course, you have to capture now. If you do this and allow king captures, then you're not going to be able to win this. This is the only winning move. We have king captures on g5, and now Magnus just played king to c2. And imagine, but here it was in this position on move 52 that Teymur Rajabov resigned the game, as there is nothing more to be done here. For those of you who are maybe new to chess, should remember this pawn structure. When the pawns are one square apart, and they are in a position like this, they control these two squares. So the king cannot come in between them. So it's very hard for the king to control these two pawns. If the pawns were anyway differently placed, then the king would be able to, but when they are like this, the king cannot go in between them, and now you can't really do anything. If you capture this pawn, you can no longer reach this pawn. It's gonna just queen, and that's it, the game over. So what you would have to do here after this king to c2 move is play something like king to g6, but now you basically give white all the time in the world to finish the game, as any way he pleases. King f7, you're going to play g5 now, and it doesn't matter if you attack the pawn. King e6, we just created the same position again. There's a wall here, the black king cannot cross, and if you capture this, then again we get a queen into the game. So here after g5 you'd have to go back, and now we finally start by messing up black's pawn structure here. Captures, and that's it. We're gonna capture this pawn as well. Let's say captures, and now of course we have 2 pawns, black has none. This is completely winning. So of course when Rajabov saw this, it was in this position that he resigned the game, and by doing that, Magnus Carlsen has qualified for the main event. So really wild stuff. Rajabov really had him. There were a couple of moves, but it's probably because Rajabov already was qualified for the main event, and he didn't really want to just make a draw or anything like that. He wanted to play a real game. He wanted to fight, and in the end, sometimes when you fight, you also lose. But that's good news for Magnus, as he now is qualified for the main event. So yeah, do use hashtag suggestion. I have some of the games that I still want to cover from this round. I'm probably going to cover them tomorrow morning, but use hashtag suggestion. If I've missed one, then of course it really helps a lot when you guys do that. So yeah, that's the game. Hope you guys enjoyed it. We're gonna check out the standings after I show one more game. So we'll see who qualified, who didn't qualify. I would like to thank Devan Shah and Aman Patel, Barry McMurdoch, Pratamesh Mahajan, Caleb Ewing, and Michal Volske for a contribution to my channel. Thank you a lot. I really appreciate it. As usual, you can check 2 of my previous videos here. Thank you all for watching, and I will see you soon, continuing the coverage of the main event, checking up on your wonderful suggestions, and whatever else happens in the chess world. Thank you all. I will see you soon, and have an excellent rest of your day.